Our final speaker of this afternoon's session is Laura Dickey Corey. Congratulations are in order because she has just defended her dissertation at the Institute of Fine Arts very successfully, a dissertation that evaluates Mary Cassatt's impact as an artist, advisor, and American tastemaker. Her research was supported by a fellowship from the Center for the History of Collecting here at the Frick in 2014, so this is a return engagement for Laura, we're happy to say, and also by a Lila Atchison Wallace Fellowship from the Institute of Fine Arts and grants from the Francis Haskell Memorial Fund and New York University. Most recently, Laura contributed a chapter titled The Many Hats of Mary Cassatt, Artist, Advisor, Broker, Tastemaker, to the 2017 Brill publication, Dealing Art on Both Sides of the Atlantic. And she has several articles that are forthcoming, all revolving around different aspects of Mary Cassatt's involvement in the art market. Laura has spoken about Cassatt at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Courtauld Institute, Bruce Museum, Christie's, College Art Association, and the Association of Historians of 19th Century Art Graduate Student Symposium. She is currently a research associate in the Department of European Paintings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she has worked on the 2013 exhibition Impressionism, Fashion, and Modernity, and the 2017 show Seurat's Circus Sideshow, as well as the exhibition currently on exhibit Public Parks, Private Gardens, Paris to Provence. She's now working on an exhibition that will celebrate the Met's 150th anniversary in 2020, so that will take a while. Laura has also contributed to other exhibitions of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist art in the United States and abroad, including Van Gogh and Japan, that is now showing at the Van Gogh Museum, and Neo-Impressionism and the Dream of Realities at the Phillips Collection, which showed in 2014-15. She was a consulting curator for the High Museum's exhibition, The Art of the Louvre's Tuileries Gardens, in 2013 and 14, for which she wrote an essay in the catalog titled Picturing the Tuileries in the 19th Century, the Park, its Public, and its Politics. And now, Laura will conclude this first day of our symposium speaking about the inspiring insider, Mary Cassatt, and the taste for Impressionism in America. Please welcome Laura Corey.
Thank you, Inga, and thank you to the Frick and the Center and all of the organizers for inviting me to take part in this symposium. As Inga mentioned, it's particularly special for me to be up here today, having just completed my dissertation, because in fact, the very first talk I gave about Cassatt was on this stage some 3.5 years ago at the culmination of my fellowship at the Center, which was this incredible, immersive period of research that very much underpinned the rest of my project. So, from the moment Mary Cassatt joined the French Impressionist circle of artists, she found herself in a unique position. Not only was she the sole American in the group and one of few female members, but hailing from the Pennsylvania gentry, she also had access to a network of eligible potential buyers in her native country. She had settled in Paris in June 1874, just after her 30th birthday and the close of the first Impressionist exhibition, intent on establishing herself as a professional painter. What followed has become a legendary part of the origin story of the history of collecting Impressionism in America. Cassatt soon met Louisine Elder, a wealthy teenager, 11 years her junior, who was visiting from New York following the death of her father. Each of the women was embarking on a new phase of life and receptive to the electric energy of the City of Light, the highly charged nerve center of the art world. Louisine recalled in her memoirs how Cassatt captivated her by, quote, showing me the splendid things in the great city, making them still more splendid by opening my eyes to their beauty through her own knowledge and appreciation. I cherished every word she uttered and remembered almost every remark she made. It seemed to me that no one could see art more understandingly, feel it more deeply, or express themselves more clearly than she did. Their lifelong bond took root over a series of visits, And in 1877, the same year Cassatt met Degas and he invited her to exhibit with the Impressionists, she convinced Louisine to make her first purchase, fittingly Degas' pastel over monotype ballet rehearsal for 500 francs, approximately $100, pooled from her allowance and money borrowed from her sisters. The picture became the first Degas and one of the first Impressionist pictures in an American collection. It piqued Louisine's desire for a Monet and a Pissarro, secured shortly thereafter, along with Cassatt's self-portrait. In 1883, Louisine married Sugar King Henry Osborne Havemeyer, known as Harry, thereby exponentially increasing her buying power. Together, they went on to build the exceptional collection that transformed the holdings of the Metropolitan Museum of Art with more than 4,500 objects, the nucleus of which is some 300 works of 19th century French art. That Cassatt advised the Havemeyers in this epic pursuit is well known, although at times her role is still understated. Her contributions to shaping their taste, especially but not exclusively in Impressionism, were a fundamental, multifaceted, and persistent influence for the rest of their lives. Louisine herself credited Cassatt as the inspiration, guide, and fairy godmother of her collection. Their partnership, initiated at the dawn of the Impressionist moment, launched Cassatt into what became a parallel career as an art advisor that lasted until her death in 1926. The Havemeyers were her primary and most acquisitive clients, to be sure, but her efforts were more broad-based than is commonly understood and were, I argue, integral to establishing the taste for Impressionism in America that has endured for nearly 150 years hence. Hers was not a casual involvement in the market, like many of the painters who have dabbled in advising, but a long-term, systematic, and effective campaign to promote the art of her circle overseas in collaboration with dealers, collectors, and her fellow artists. As Ambroise Vollard wrote, quote, "It was with a sort of frenzy that generous Mary Cassatt labored for the success of her comrades, Monet, Pissarro, Cézanne, Sisley, and the rest." Due to gaps in surviving records, it's impossible to precisely quantify the number of Impressionist works she played a role in sending across the Atlantic, but the range is in the hundreds, amounting to an impressive impact that deserves greater recognition for its formative influence on American taste. Today, I want to focus in particular on her taste in Impressionism, her particular taste in Impressionism, by looking at some of the most interesting intersections, the points of overlap in the collection she advised, for she did not recommend all types of Impressionist art equally. There were artists and categories she returned to regularly, and in some cases actively sought to promote above others. She was not the great proponent of the classic, light-drenched Impressionist landscape, although those appear in most of the collections she consulted on as they became readily available in the marketplace. Her preferences range from subjects she favored in her own work, like female figure paintings, to those she seems to have honed in on to appeal to her collectors' interests, and still more that are no less important but cannot be explained as neatly. She learned how to modulate her sales pitch to appeal to different buyers, capitalizing on her insider knowledge as a part of the French avant-garde and her ability to speak the language, literally and figuratively, of wealthy American industrialists. After her death, the artist George Biddle recalled that, quote, "Miss Cassatt, more than any man I ever knew, through the youthful intensity of her feeling, could make her hearer share her enthusiasm for her ideas and her faith in ideas." Her charisma helped her capture the attention of more than a dozen collectors stationed in the capitals of culture and commerce around the turn of the century, from Baltimore to Boston along the eastern seaboard, and west to Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Chicago. After getting her start with Louisine in the 1870s, she learned the tools of the trade in the 1880s while assembling a collection of more than 30 of her colleagues' pictures for her brother, Alexander Cassatt, an executive and eventual president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. She also made select purchases for her parents and other brother Gardner, and began expanding her network through family ties, including Anna Riddle Scott, a cousin and widow of Alexander's mentor at the railroad, and Frank Thompson, another railroad executive. In the early 1890s, Chicagoans Bertha and Potter Palmer consulted her to agree still not fully understood as they rapidly accumulated the large collection they showcased at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Around the same time, she began lookouts for Connecticut iron magnate Harris Whittemore and later his associate and family friend Alfred Atmore Pope of Cleveland and Connecticut, both of whom became important collectors of Impressionism, Pope with around 24 examples and Whittemore with more than 150, including prints. By the turn of the century, Cassatt had become a sought-after advisor and proposed pictures to various others, including industrial tycoon Oliver Payne and banker James Stillman, both of New York, and Bostonians Sarah Choate Sears and Frank Gare Macomber. She sold 2 paintings from her personal collection directly to another railroad mogul, Henry Walters of New York and Baltimore, in 1903. Still, other collectors felt her influence, even if they may not have worked with her directly. For instance, several of Henry Clay Frick's late purchases testify to the impact of the Havemeyer collection on establishing standards of taste. And the younger Philadelphian artist Carroll Tyson gleaned insights from Cassatt before he started actively buying his collection of some 24 Impressionist pictures. The 20th century also saw the expansion of her repertoire into the old masters and categories eventually as diverse as medieval sculpture and Persian pottery, but Impressionism was always at the heart of her practice. By the time Cassatt was invited into the group in 1877, she had identified Courbet, Manet, and Degas as what she called her true masters, and she would remain most devoted to that triumvirate for the duration of her advising career. Her foremost allegiance to Degas has been discussed at length, most recently on occasion of the 2014 Degas-Cassatt exhibition at the National Gallery of Art. Here I wish to highlight 2 major points before considering some less familiar aspects of her repertoire. First, she often used Degas' ballet scenes to initiate her collectors' interest in Impressionism, beginning with Louisine's ballet rehearsal in 1877. In 1889, the Palmers bought a similar pastel as their first Impressionist work, potentially, though not definitely, at Cassatt's behest, in the absence of their primary advisor, Sarah Tyson Hallowell, whom we'll hear more about tomorrow. Both are bold compositions rendered in pastel over monotite on a substantial yet domestic scale close to 2 feet in height. Louisine recalled, "It was so new and strange to me. I scarce knew how to appreciate it or whether I liked it or not. However, Cassatt left me in no doubt as to the desirability of the purchase, and I bought it upon her advice." For her brother Alexander, a horse racing enthusiast, Cassatt originally sought a Degas jockey picture to start his Impressionist collection, but when her quest met a dead end, she selected the ballet class, secured in June 1881 after months of negotiations with the artist. His first Degas is echoed by the one Harry Havemeyer and Paul Durand-Ruel presented to Oliver Payne in 1898 to entice him to Impressionism, perhaps with Cassatt's counsel. Shortly after he bought it, she wrote to Louisine, "Colonel Payne's Degas is more beautiful than any Vermeer I ever saw. Tell him that." By declaring the superiority of the picture to those of a blue-chip old master, she sought to build his confidence in this new direction for his collection. These 2 paintings are larger, just under 3 feet high, and more refined than the pastels, perhaps selected to appeal to businessmen less eager to expand their horizons. As one of Degas' signature subjects, ballet scenes appeared in many American collections, including those inspired directly or indirectly by Cassatt's taste. She would go on to recommend nearly the full range of Degas' styles and subjects in different media, with notable exceptions of his landscapes and, as might be expected, brothel scenes. She did, however, have a penchant for his controversial nude bathers, as Erica Hirschler pointed out in the catalog for the 1998 exhibition, Mary Cassatt, Modern Woman. Cassatt acquired Woman Bathing in a Shallow Tub in an exchange with Degas following the 1886 Impressionist exhibition, sold later in life through Durand-Ruel to Louisine, who ultimately owned 8 Degas nudes. Cassatt took great pride in the bather and wrote to Louisine in 1913, "Degas' art, after all, is for the very few. I cannot believe that many would care for the nude I have. Those things are for painters and connoisseurs." She undoubtedly had equal pride in the connoisseurs she cultivated. 2 of Cassatt's other female advisees bought Degas bathers, Bertha Palmer in 1896 and Sarah Sears in 1900, most likely either on her advice or after seeing the one she owned. In 1907, Cassatt coordinated with the art publisher August Giacacci to convince Alfred Pope to buy the tub. Even though at that point she had over 30 years of advising experience, Giacacci did not have full faith in her ability to persuade this independent-minded collector, who indeed had turned down several of her proposals in the 1890s. He wrote in advance of Pope's visit to Paris to Cassatt, "I do hope you will prevail upon him to buy the Degas at Durand-Ruel's, and think the best way would be not to tell him to do so much as to tell him the story of Mr. Havemeyer and what you told him so that the Metropolitan Museum might have it. Give him your opinion of the work and let him draw his own conclusions and come to it himself." Pope may not have been her first choice buyer for the picture, for when she wrote to Durand-Ruel about her plans, she added that the tub had come up over lunch with James Stillman and the German artist Friedrich Kaulbach, who, quote, gave an enthusiastic elegy about the painting in question, yet Stillman remained unresponsive. She tried for years to sell him on a Degas to no avail, even though by all accounts he was quite taken with her as an artist and advisor. His daughter-in-law recalled that Cassatt pursued his artistic education in her own fiery way and was an ever loyal and sympathetic friend. Her efforts paid off in other ways. He became one of the most fervent collectors of her work and took her advice on other aspects of his collection, but never on this score. Her frustration was familiar from a dead end she met in 1886 when she had tried to convince her brother's railroad colleague Frank Thompson to consider Degas' horse racing pictures alongside the Monets he enlisted her to scout for him. Cassatt's unwavering dedication to promoting Degas' work is as evident in her failures as her successes. Her efforts, however, were not limited to Degas. She also favored female subjects, often in half-length, by her other true master, Manet. In 1884, she selected portraits of Agostina Segatori and Marguerite de Conflans for her brother from the artist's estate sale. When reminiscing about Alexander's collection to Louisine in 1920, she singled out the latter as a masterpiece, boasting of her selection, "The head and bust of a woman with a white hat, which Manet always kept in his own sitting room, is very fine. I bought it at the sale through Alphonse Portier for 250 francs, a bargain price." It's noteworthy that by this time, Louisine owned a variation on that subject, purchased in 1903, most likely with her advisor's encouragement. Cassatt selected similar pictures, although of a later date, from Manet's estate for her cousin Anna Riddle Scott. She had only recently begun to persuade Scott of the appeal of avant-garde French art. Just months before, Cassatt's mother reported that Scott, quote, says all her ideas of art are upset, and she won't buy much until she knows exactly what she likes. At present, she is somewhat in the dark. She never became a prolific collector, but Cassatt's sales pitch was compelling enough to convince her to make several purchases. As with Degas, Cassatt's taste remained consistent over multiple decades. She may have been instrumental in placing one of Manet's best half-length female figure paintings, Spring, in Oliver Payne's collection in 1909, a picture the Havemeyers had previously considered. Around the same time, James Stillman bought Morisot's Behind the Blinds. Cassatt was less vocal about her opinion of Morisot's work, but several of her figure paintings appear in the collections Cassatt advised, including those of her brother and the Whittemores. Indeed, one of her own first purchases was a Morisot toilette from the 1878 sale of Ernest Hocheday's collection, and she probably bought the one shown here at center in 1896. Monet's early paintings of women appealed to her as well. She acquired Springtime around 1889 and later sold it to Henry Walters after learning from his agent, George Lucas, that he intended to leave his collection to the public and was willing to add a few Impressionist pictures. On the bank of the Seine, Bennecourt is in turn an outlier in the Palmers' holdings. They were some of the earliest and most devoted buyers of Monet's series paintings, as we've seen, but those seem to have never captivated Cassatt. They bought this painting in 1892, a period when Bertha was in frequent communication about Cassatt's mural for the Chicago World's Fair, so it's tempting to wonder if it was selected on her advice. In fact, Cassatt was an avid believer in Monet's early works, especially in his seascapes, a trend in her advising repertoire that has previously escaped much attention. The Cassatt's first purchase from Durand-Ruel was the banks of the Zan in April 1881, which Mary bought for Alexander for 800 francs. Their father reported to him on the acquisition, quote, "It is a beauty, and you will see the day when you will have an offer of 8,000 for it." Cassatt was always keen to emphasize the investment potential of Monet's to her financially savvy brother, and he built a significant collection, mostly dating to the 1860s and 1870s. After he died, she told Louisine, "People think I lived on his money, but with these pictures, his heirs will make as much as all my capital. He left 12 or 14 Monets, early manner, and certainly his best." Other members of the family also collected early Monets. In 1878, Cassatt bought The Beach at Trouville from the Hocheday sale for her parents. 5 years later, with their approval, she exchanged it for the bolder composition, The Green Wave, which her mother described as, quote, "certainly one of those which it would take an artist to appreciate, or maybe a sailor. It is a boat tossing on a great wave tipped with foam. The contrast of the white foam and the very dark blue of the water is tremendous." The painting would later make its way into her brother Gardner's collection and then to the Havemeyers in 1898. To cite a few of many other examples, the drawbridge Amsterdam had been Louisine's first Monet purchase back around 1877, and in 1884, Cassatt bought Argenteuil, the bridge under repair, from Durand-Ruel for Frank Thompson. He may have been drawn to the industrial subject, here a road bridge encased in scaffolding, for its affinity with his own profession. But of course, it was more than subject matter that fascinated Cassatt about Monet's early style, re-examined last year in George Shackelford's exhibition in Fort Worth and San Francisco. Whatever her reasons, it's not surprising then that she also endorsed Manet's Marines of the same period. Her brother bought Marine in Holland in 1884, and she was probably responsible for Whittemore's purchase of the port of Calais shortly after she met him in 1893. 5 years later, she was surprised to see the painting in Durand-Ruel's New York gallery on one of her rare visits to her home country. Louisine recounted in her memoirs, "After greeting us, Mr. Joseph Durand-Ruel made a remark to Miss Cassatt which I did not hear, but I heard her exclaim, 'What? He returned the Manet Marine to buy a Whistler? Mercy sakes, what is art coming to?' And turning to me, she added, 'Harris W. has returned his Manet Marine. Do let us go see it, for you will surely want it.'" Cassatt's reaction suggests that she may have been offended that Whittemore returned a painting she had recommended, particularly for the work of a painter she at times said she detested. On the same trip, she introduced another one of her favorite categories into the Havemeyer collection, Manet's Spanish subjects. When Louisine raised the concern that Harry would find the Matador too large, Cassatt scoffed, "Don't be foolish, it's just the size Manet wanted it, and that ought to suffice for Mr. Havemeyer. Besides, it's a splendid Manet, and I'm sure he would like for you to buy it." He was convinced, and they soon bought that as well as the Majo and Espada. Their willingness to take on large paintings at this point was tied to their growing commitment to bring important works of art to America for the eventual benefit of the public, a cause Cassatt ardently espoused. In a somewhat similar encounter in 1909, she had what she called a chance meeting with the Boston insurance agent Frank Guerre-Macomber at Villard's gallery in Paris, where she talked him into buying one of Manet's imposing paintings of the brutal execution of the Mexican Emperor Maximilian. Macomber wrote to the director of the Museum of Fine Arts that his, quote, attention was called to the painting by Miss Mary Cassatt, who thought it one of the most romantic pictures she had ever seen. Maybe a little bit surprising, adding that the painting would be too large to hang in his home, and he bought it with the idea of exhibiting at the museum. Cassatt very well may have helped him arrive at this point of view. The art and culture of the Hispanic world had long been of interest to her. In 1871, she told a friend, "I really feel as if it was intended I should be a Spaniard, and quite a mistake that I was born in America." She went on to explore the country during her artistic training before she settled in Paris. A quarter century later, right around the turn of the 20th century, she would play an important part in instigating the American taste for Spanish painting by proposing works by El Greco and Goya to both private collectors and directly to museums. The Havemeyers inspired many others, including Stillman, Payne, Frick, and Tyson. Unlike with Impressionism, though, which Cassatt knew firsthand, she had little real knowledge of the old masters and relied on sometimes specious agents to hunt down works of art in their countries of origin. Her results thus ranged widely. Some, like many of the Havemeyer Goyas, have had their attributions downgraded. On the other hand, one of her greatest achievements was her role in finding a museum to buy El Greco's monumental Assumption of the Virgin. Not only was this a major contribution to the collecting of old masters in America, but she also conscientiously connected Impressionism to Spanish Golden Age painting in her campaign to secure the place of her school in the canon of Western art. Around the same time she extended her advising repertoire back to the old masters, she looked forward a bit to Cézanne. She purchased 2 of his still lifes for her own collection in 1896 in her first known transactions with Villard. Granted, both were created during the Impressionist era, and when recommending Cézanne's work, she maintained a relatively conservative stance. In 1901, she took the Havemeyers to his gallery, where they bought a group of 7 Cézannes, including his still life with jar, cup, and apples on the upper right. The other 2 were bought from Villard in 1906, on the upper left by the Havemeyers, and at the bottom by Bostonian Sarah Sears. But before long, Cassatt changed her tune, selling back both of her Cézannes and trying to talk Louisine into doing the same, ostensibly to take advantage of a bloated market that she believed cannot last. It is folly. She wrote, "I was one of his first admirers, but I certainly never put him where they do, and drew the line as to him being a great figure painter. Ah, no." Louisine consigned Self-Portrait with a Cap and The Banks of the Marne to Durand-Ruel in 1909, a decision she later regretted and would not repeat in spite of Cassatt's ongoing appeals over the next several years. In reality, Cassatt had become jealous of the rising fortunes of the new avant-garde, and she was vehemently opposed to the likes of Matisse and Picasso. In 1908, Sears escorted her to one of Gertrude Stein's salon evenings. She had the chauffeur wait outside, and for good reason. After taking in the scene, Cassatt reportedly said, "I have never in my life seen so many dreadful paintings in one place. I have never seen so many dreadful people gathered together, and I want to be taken home at once." She was certain that this modernism was a fad that would die out, and claimed that no Frenchman of any standing in the art world, nor any sound artist, respected Matisse or the Cubists. At this point in her 60s, Cassatt had reached her limits for her appreciation for contemporary art. She would make equally disparaging remarks about the late works of her former colleagues, stating, for instance, in 1914 that Renoir, quote, "is doing the most awful pictures, or rather studies, of enormously fat, underlined, red women with very small heads." Or in 1918 that Monet's water lilies look to me like glorified wallpaper. Although museums in the art market will attest that she was short-sighted in her dismissal of modernism, that should not take away from her essential contributions to the history of collecting Impressionism, and especially to the categories she promoted most broadly. Over a span of 50 years, Cassatt dedicated considerable energy, first to cultivating a new market for Impressionism in the New World, and then to establishing its long-term legacy. This all matters because the works Cassatt helped export to America were some of the first to be seen by a new public. Visitors to collectors' homes and to some of the earliest and most prominent exhibitions, like Durand-Ruel's shows in New York in 1886 and the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, both of which she helped find lenders for. Cassatt encouraged her advisees to support these exhibitions and in the long term to donate their collections to museums to inspire artists and for the general betterment of society. Many of them did, and thus her taste is reflected in prominent Impressionist collections in American institutions. The Met, above all, due to the Havemeyers, but with key works from Payne and Stillman. The Philadelphia Museum of Art from her family, their railroad network, and Tyson. The Art Institute of Chicago from the Palmers, various objects in the National Gallery of Art, and select works in important collections like the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Walters, the Frick, the Pope's Hillstead Museum in Connecticut, Electra Havemeyer Webb's Shelburne Museum in Vermont, and assorted other museums across the country. Still other pictures continue to be traded in private hands, and even a high percentage of those remains on American soil. Well, of course, Cassatt was never in complete control of what collectors decided to acquire. Her impact, evaluated by the quantity and overall quality of the works she sent to America, was tremendous, earning her a place not only among the important early promoters of Impressionism, but also as one of the most significant and prolific artist advisors in history. Thank you.